Hello, my name is Legionless, and this is an average gamer's review of Outward, where I hope to help you make the decision to play or not play Outward if you only have time to game a couple hours a night or a few hours on the weekend. With a job, life, a family, or any number of things that can get in the way, your time is precious and you can't get it back from a bad game or a game you didn't enjoy. Outward is an RPG game focusing around surviving in a world where you're just an ordinary adventurer. You're not a god, you're not a hero, but you'll need to protect yourself against the harsh environment, disease, hunger, thirst, enemies, and more. You'll be able to take on this world alone or co-op with a friend. Outward gives the ordinary person and all of us the chance to be so much more, but only if you put the time in. This review is broken into 3 sections and will contain no story spoilers. First, is Outward fun to play and how quickly does the fun start? Then, does Outward and its world immerse the player into caring about their character and the impact the character makes early on, or is it flat and uninteresting? And lastly, will Outward respect the player's valuable and limited time or leave you with dozens and dozens of hours filled with unenjoyment? The gameplay in Outward is not revolutionary. It falls somewhere in the middle of comfortably familiar and clunky. Combat is in third person, similar to what you expect in a Dark Souls type game, but not quite as smooth and rewarding it feels when you kill something. You lock onto a target, you attack with a melee weapon like a dagger or an axe, with a ranged weapon like a gun or a bow, or magic that gets depleted from your mana bar. Attacking is fine, and actually felt rather enjoyable on keyboard and mouse compared to other games with similar combat, but blocking and rolling can be annoying because of the pack you're carrying. The combat isn't hard or challenging by any means, but it's just not very rewarding. You can't dodge effectively with your pack on, and items and gear inside your pack can actually lose durability or be destroyed completely when hit. You're told at the beginning of the game that you should drop your pack if you get into combat. I found this to be more frustrating than I thought it added to the game's charm. Early into the game, I was at a small cave dungeon and I was trying to leave with the item needed for a quest. I was almost out and my starting pack was too small for all the interesting things I found. It was slowing me down a lot. I had to put it down when 2 enemies appeared when I almost reached the exit, or else I would have not been able to survive the attack. I killed the first, and the second was about to die, and then it started running away. I chased it down, killed it, and then spent almost 10 minutes trying to find where I put my pack down. You can't actually die in Outward, like you will time and time again in Dark Souls, but that's not to say failing can't be punishing. One of the game's unique features is that when you lose all of your health, you don't die, but you wake up at a new location on the map. This gets explained pretty interestingly by random scenarios like a friendly passerby returning you to a nearby town or being captured by enemies and having to escape imprisonment. This gameplay feature is probably my favorite thing about the game because it takes something so well established in RPGs like respawning from a checkpoint. It does something different that adds to your personal story. Unfortunately, that only feels great in small doses. If you're a player that dies a lot, you're going to find yourself needing to spend time getting out of situations you weren't planning for, like the person I mentioned a moment ago, before you can get back on track with whatever you were originally working on. It can be really frustrating feeling like you're not making much or any progress after an hour or 2 of playing before logging off. It can take quite a few hours to start understanding the systems in Outward, mostly because of how much is not communicated well to the player. If you're unfamiliar with survival-based RPGs like I was, the UI wasn't good enough to easily communicate important information to me, like if I needed to eat or drink, what kind of disease I had so I knew how to cure it, or really any of the status effects I had. I found I needed to Google what a particular status symbol I'd get meant, which just kind of sucks having to be ripped out of any immersion I was feeling to understand a basic survival system. Like I briefly touched on earlier, the inventory weight system felt a little too strict compared to common RPGs. You start to slow down quickly after reaching the cap on weight, and it exponentially gets worse until you actually cannot move. It wasn't that I had pounds and pounds of stuff over capacity in my inventory, but maybe around 10 to 12 extra weight, which is only a few items. This is something you'll always need to consider. There's a pretty fine balance on how much stuff to bring on adventures to survive and make it back safely, and having enough space to pick up important things during the journey. Sadly though, it won't take you very long to grow out of the survival mechanics until they don't matter. You'll eventually only notice them as an annoyance you can quickly smack away, like when the check engine light on your car randomly comes on and all you have to do is tap your dashboard to make it go away. If you're not a fan of running around slowly because you're being encumbered by a little weight, or of games with quite a few survival mechanics, Outward might not be for you. You won't find enough enjoyment and fun out of its standard combat to make up for what will more than likely just frustrate you. The survival mechanics will get easier and less frustrating, but you might not want to wait until that happens. Does Outward immerse you into its world? Without going into any story spoilers, I think there wasn't enough to immediately pull a player into the world, to fall in love with the environment and want to venture forth into the unknown. The first few minutes of the game really had no impact to drive you forward, that it honestly felt like it could have been cut out completely. It felt like a different type of story was about to be told, but then you pass out and wake up to what the actual story will be. Like if those few minutes at the start were just some sort of daydream. The sad part is that you can tell these few minutes were meant to have some sort of significance. They were supposed to add motivation that would make you struggle between choices you can make to solve the problem you're faced with at the beginning, but the impact will really miss the mark for me. Once you move past that shaky start, I do think it's a little easier to get pulled into the world, but it really takes some time to get to that point. The environment looks really beautiful in places. There's religion, culture, and history to explore that builds the world. There's characters with their own motivations and secrets doing what they feel driven towards doing. There's cities with their progressive way of thinking. There's villages dying out with their rigid and harsh traditions. There's factions with their own motivations for you to align with. But the sad part is, there are some bones there for this world to be a vast place with a depth to pull you in for hours and hours. It can just feel so bland and empty. A minor nitpick I had about the characters was the voice acting. The voice acting seemed a lot to be desired. Some characters were good, and then others you just can't help but raise an eyebrow at. I would never say the voice acting was bad, but that I went from feeling a part of the world and then reminded I'm just playing a video game when a character speaks. Also, it feels like they really tried to cut corners in the budget, since only part of a dialogue box was actually voiced. The rest was just text left on the screen. Is your time respected? Outward is very reminiscent of RPGs from the 90s and early 2000s, in that you're going to be doing a lot of running from point A to point B and then back to A without very much guidance. You're going to be relying on dialogue to push you forward to the next area and not quest markers on a map, like in more recent RPGs. If you only have a couple hours in the evening to play, you're going to be using a very noticeable amount of that time just traveling, especially if your inventory is full. Like I mentioned about no quest markers on the map, if you forget where you were at the end of your last play session when you return, it'll be really difficult to get going again. Your movement speed will slow to a crawl, and your patience will be tested as frustration rises when your inventory is full. Often at times, it can feel like you're spending all of your time running out of a dungeon back to town, selling the stuff you're able to carry, and then running back to the dungeon to pick up and then sell what you couldn't carry before. The game auto-saves often, so you won't have to worry about forgetting to save during your play session and dying and losing all of your progression at the end. The frequent autosave is so that when you lose all of your health, you get a random scenario, like I mentioned before, which is the game's main shtick. Because of the frequent autosaves, that scenario becomes part of your character's story permanently, so being able to save at a boss you think you might die to would remove that piece of story. Unfortunately, that charm can really lose its appeal when you're focused on progressing the story, lose your health, and need to spend time getting out of a random situation the game puts you into. When you're getting close to the goal you have for yourself for your evening or weekend session, you can go from enjoyment to resentment really quickly when this happens. Then you need to decide whether you get off like you planned or see things out to completion in the hopes it won't take that long. In conclusion, Outward feels like a game made by developers that have a chip on their shoulder that modern RPGs are too easy or forgiving. It comes across that, in their opinion, gameplay mechanics that respect the player's time, like travel between locations only taking a couple minutes, or letting the player save where they want to, so if they die, they don't get dropped in a random location involving backtracking or getting out of unplanned situations, are what makes a game challenging. That players deep down crave frustration as challenge. I do not think I can recommend this game to the average gamer that only has a few hours a night or on the weekends to play. The combat was alright, but not fun enough to put up with everything else that I felt detracted from the game. The story, characters, and dialogue had flickers of being something more, but just fell flat and left a bland and uninteresting world. If you're into games that challenge you, there's better options out there than this. Let me know in the comments below if you had a similar or different experience with Outward. Share this video with anyone you think might be on the fence about purchasing and playing this game, and I'll see you next time.